Okay, welcome everybody. I am Jim Esserman, Executive Vice President of Vital MD and a practicing OBGYN in Miami. I have the great pleasure to introduce my sister, Dr. Laura Esserman, the principal investigator of the Wisdom Study. The Wisdom Study, which stands for Women Informed to Screen Depending on Measures of Risk, is a groundbreaking trial that aims to move breast cancer screening away from its current one-size-fits-all approach to one that is personalized based on each woman's individual risk. Vital MD and its 4 top-line diagnostic centers have been selected to participate in the study. Laura Esserman, an internationally recognized breast surgeon, breast oncology specialist, and visionary in personalized medicine, is revolutionizing breast cancer screening and treatment throughout our nation today. As a professor of surgery and radiology at the University of California, San Francisco, and the director of the UCSF Carol Frank Buck Breast Care Center, Dr. Esserman's breast cancer work spans a spectrum from basic science to public policy issues and the impact of both on the delivery of clinical care. She is a provocative thought leader calling attention to and finding solutions for overdiagnosis and overtreatment of breast cancer, especially of DCIS. Dr. Esserman has led the creation of the University of California-wide Athena Breast Health Network, a learning system designed to integrate clinical care and research as it follows 150,000 women from screening through treatment and outcomes. As part of the network, she has spearheaded the development of the Wisdom Study to learn how to improve breast cancer screening. Mammography screening has been a linchpin in the fight to reduce the risk of dying of breast cancer, yet is among the most controversial public health issues of our time. The aging scientific debate over the benefits and risks of screening mammography has led to multiple conflicting recommendations to women about how to best prevent the most feared of all cancers in women. It is an issue that affects every woman and every family. It is time we do better by applying what we have learned about the science of breast cancer and breast cancer risk to do more good and less harm. Wisdom is the first large-scale study testing a different approach to breast cancer screening since it first began over 40 years ago. In that time, we have learned much about breast cancer and the risk factors that contribute to it. It's well past time for a modern era study that brings new solutions forward that will benefit all women. I would also like to introduce Dr. Michael Plaza. He is a fellowship-trained breast radiologist and the MRI director at the Diagnostic Center for Women. He is our local site PI. Our local study coordinator is Isabella Caballero. This webinar has been a collaborative effort with the Athena Breast Health Network team led by Allison Stover-Fiscalini, the director, and the FEMO marketing team led by Krista Garcia. Laura, you're on.
Thanks so much, Jim. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, fantastic. Yes. All right. We're really excited to be participating with you, and we think this is going to be a fantastic partnership, and we're so excited to open this study in your group. You represent an area of the country that is just incredibly diverse in your patient population and the participants you have with your opportunity for us to really roll Wisdom out in a setting where, like, from the primary care physicians and the radiologists, everyone is on board in trying to find solutions to make breast cancer screening better and to reduce the chance of dying for women with breast cancer. So go ahead, next slide. Those of you for your colleagues who couldn't attend will be able to attend later. The Q&A function at the bottom of your screen post-meeting survey for your feedback. So thanks for joining our conversation. Next slide. Okay. Going to talk about how the study works, and then we're happy to answer any of your questions. So go ahead to the next slide. Next slide. Next slide. So as Jim was saying, there's a lot of controversy and conflict about screening, about when to start, when to stop, how often to screen. And women often find themselves caught in the middle, and sometimes people get so frustrated they just think maybe they shouldn't go in at all. And that obviously is not the right answer. Next slide. So these are the 20% of people screen. It depends a little bit on your race. And the lowest rates of screening actually are in the Hispanic population. It used to be that African American women did not screen as often, but that their screening rates have caught up, and Asian women are a little bit lower as well. Next line. Next. So there's a lot of barriers to screening. Sometimes it's financial, whether or not people have health insurance. People are concerned about cost. People don't have sick leave, or they're unable to miss work. And people have had solutions like sending out mobile mammography vans, trying to get access to specialized centers. That's one of the reasons why I think TopLine MD or Vital MD has set up these diagnostic centers, because one of the most important things is having expertise in screening, and having a great breast radiologist is really one of the keys to having good screening. And sometimes people don't have transportation, but that's one of the problems that you've solved. And sometimes people don't understand, or they get confused about the recommendation. People are afraid of bad news. And one of the things that has been a problem is that one of the common things that happens with a mammogram is that people can get called back. And it turns out that people who are called back once have a reduced chance of going back for screening. And if they've actually had a biopsy or called back twice for a false alarm, like 30 to 40% of people stop going altogether. So next slide. So who gets breast cancer? Well, it actually turns out it likely depends on your risk. Every woman has a different risk of developing breast cancer. So family history, genetics, your breast density, your age, what your race or ethnicity is, whether you've had a prior biopsy, and whether your breast tissue is dense and forms masses, when you start your periods, how often you've had, how many children you've had, whether you breastfeed, and whether you take hormone replacement therapy. So there's a number of things that we really know that actually help us understand whether or not you're going to get breast cancer, but none of these is perfect. Next slide. So it turns out that the incidence rates for white women and African American women, Black women, are about the same. They're lower for Hispanic women, but the problem is for white women and Black women, the death rates are really quite different. Now, some people think that that's because of access, but we increasingly understand that's because of the kinds of cancers that people are likely to get. People often develop different kinds of cancers, and part of what we want to do is make sure that we understand who gets what kind of cancer, and that when people do get cancer, they get cancer treatments that are tailored to them, and so that they can get not more than they need, but what they need. Next slide. So it also turns out that among younger women, women under 40, Black women also have higher rates of breast cancer compared to white women. And so one of the things, and it turns out that breast cancer is the leading cause of cancer death for Latina and Hispanic women. So it represents 16% of all cancer deaths in the United States. So next slide. So it turns out we don't treat all breast cancers the same. We treat them based on their biology. Women don't have the same kind of cancer, so it doesn't really make sense that a one-size-fits-all approach to screening. One size does not fit all should apply to screening. Next slide. So why is it, go back one. Why should we change our approach to screening? Isn't what we're doing good enough? Well, actually, no. Despite everything that we are doing, 40,000 women every year in the United States alone die of breast cancer. And over half of the stage 2 and 3 breast cancers present as palpable masses. Women find them themselves. So they aren't being found by screening. And why is that? It's not because screening is bad. It's because the cancers are bad. These cancers grow more quickly. So we need different strategies. We need not only to be able to figure out who to screen, when to screen, how to screen, but we need to find out who's at risk for those aggressive cancers and figure out not only how to screen them more frequently, but how we can reduce their risk. It turns out 75% of women who get biopsies don't actually have cancer. And that's a very stressful procedure for people if they don't have cancer. So clearly we need to improve. So we can apply what we've learned about breast cancer to screening. And that's what the Wisdom study is really all about. Next slide. So this is an unprecedented opportunity. There have been huge advances in science and technology. There's been lots of advances in cancer prevention, but we're actually not very good at applying it. There have been lots of advances in risk assessment, but again, we have no strategy to apply it. Most of you think about the Framingham study, we think about cardiology and how to find people who are at risk for heart disease and put them on cholesterol lowering medications, or we think about lowering their blood pressure. We don't have anything like that in breast cancer, and we can. The tools are at our fingertips. And it turns out that, the Affordable Care Act and the GINA Act really make it possible for women, to feel safe about getting genetic information. The huge revolution in understanding risk, even if the rare genes, as well as the many genes that people inherit, these so-called SNPs or single nucleotide polymorphisms, that together, polygenic risk can really help us identify who's at higher risk or not. The increasing understanding of the radiomic features, a great opportunity to apply this, but we don't do it. We don't have an infrastructure for it. And when the Supreme Court said you couldn't own the genome, it opened up the pathway for technology, to bring in next generation sequencing to dramatically lower the costs for sequencing by about tenfold, to make the assessment of genetic risk about the price of a mammogram. So all of this is right for us to really put all these pieces together in a whole new way. Next slide. So that's the Wisdom study. As Jim said, it's wisdom informed to screen depending on measures of risk. And the study compares two things: a more personalized approach to screening and a standard screening approach where everybody gets an annual mammogram starting at age 40. Next slide. So this very large scale randomized trial, and we have 33,000 women already that have signed up for the study. This requires a large number of participants. We're trying to double that number. We'd like to get to 65 or 70,000 women. But it's also essential that women from all backgrounds participate. We need Hispanic women. We need women who, from, and actually different parts of the country have Hispanic women from different backgrounds. We want to include all of them. We need African-American women, we need Asian women, and we need white women, because each of the risk based on your ethnicity can be incorporated into the way we assess risk. And as well, we don't just want to screen. We want to identify those women who are at risk for breast cancer and who have options to reduce their risk, not only to apply what we know today, but what we're going to learn tomorrow. That's how we're going to make a dent and really reduce the chance that people die of breast cancer. Next slide. So what is a personalized approach to screening? Next. And that means that we look at their breast density. We look at their genetic information. As I said, there are 9 genes, now probably 11 genes, based on the New England Journal report last week, but we can keep improving this study as we go along. And this combination of genes that we call polygenic risk, we can put that together with lifestyle. So when someone started their period, when they ended their period, and how we can put all of that together. That is how we come up with a risk assessment, and we put that into 4 buckets. Next slide. And based on that, you might be told if you're in your 40s that if your risk is low, and it's, you know, that we wouldn't start your screening until age 50. Or you might be at average risk, in which case the U.S. Preventive Task Force suggests that every other year screening is just as safe and better and less morbid than annual screening. Or we might think that you have moderately high risk and we think you should get an annual mammogram, or we think you are in that top 2.5% or that top 0.5% of risk where you have a 6% risk, in which case you should be getting an annual mammogram alternating with an MRI. And as well, we want to reach out in these and to the top 2.5% of women at risk and do recommended counseling, you know, to find options for helping reduce breast cancer risk. And so next slide. So these are the gene mutations and the genetic variations. We talked about that. We talked about this. There are moderate to high risk genes, BRCA1 and 2, P53, P10, and it's lower risk genes like CHEK2 and ATM, PALB2 is in the higher risk group. And that moderate risk is the number of variants. When we started the study, there were 7. A year after we started the study, there were 70, and now there are 350. And every year we keep upgrading our risk assessment tools. Next slide. As well, one of the things that we have is we have a breast health decisions tool. And this is going to be a great thing, I think, for you, because it's like everything you need to know about breast cancer prevention in a box. And we have breast health specialists that are trained centrally. They go through this risk with everybody and show people this is an automated tool. All their information goes in and it's there, and they can actually share this tool with you. So once they've talked to a breast health specialist and we recommend they think about prevention, we can send those patients back to you and they can share all of the information here that you can look through, and you can, in about 5 minutes, get all the information you need. So this is really important. And at some point, if you're interested in me going through this how to use this tool, I'm more than happy to do this. This is something that I've been working on for years, and we're really excited about this tool. Next slide. So the breast health decisions tool tries to show what the person just like me, what their risk is. And this is someone who has an increased risk, someone just like me. And it shows them what their risk is and what their and what the average person is. And you can see this person has many more pink people in that group than not. And we can show them, we could drop that by half and bring them down to an average risk if they take something to reduce their risk. And then we go through the risks and benefits of that as well. Next slide. So the questions that we're trying to ask with this study are, next slide, is this just as safe? Are we just as good at avoiding the high-risk cancers? Screening is not perfect. It's not going to be perfect with personalized, and it's not going to be perfect with annual. Despite screening, people are going to slip through and interval cancers will develop. But if the personalized approach is just as good as the approach with the annual screening, this is a better way to do it. And as our tools get more and more sophisticated and our prevention gets better and better, we hopefully will be able to also start reducing the chance that people get cancer, and we will avoid the extra biopsies and maybe finding indolent cancers that never would come to clinical attention. Next slide. The other thing we're asking, does it reduce biopsies and false positives and the rate of DCIS? Next slide. Will it encourage more women to take up prevention interventions if they understand their risk? Next slide. Is it better accepted by women? Are more women, so if the trial is pragmatic, So we ask people to be randomized, but if they feel very strongly, they can choose which arm they want. And when they do that, we actually understand, do people prefer to get that personalized risk information? Next slide. And at the end of the day, we want to know, do we get better value for women and better value for society by taking this more personalized approach? So with that, next slide, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Michael Plaza. And I'm very excited. This is keeping it all in the family. Michael worked with my sister, Lisa, as well as with Jim. And my sister's also a breast radiologist. And he trained at Wake Forest with a fellowship at Memorial Sloan Kettering. And he'll be happy to know that his former boss is actually moving out to Davis to be, so Liz Morris is the chair of radiology at UC Davis and is going to be very involved in the wisdom study. So we're very excited about that. And he's been working on a number of trials, including cryoablation. And we actually have a whole new screening program that we're going to roll out for high-risk women that he's been instrumental in participating in. So, there you go. Michael, weekend
Thank
warrior.
You.
All
Yeah,
up to you.
I just threw that in. Thank you. And thank you everyone for listening in. And it's really a privilege to serve as the local site principal investigator for the Wisdom trial on behalf of our organization. So next slide, let's get right into it. Next slide. So as you know, one of the principal aims and ideas for our organization, what it means to be a top-line MD physician, is a commitment to continuous improvement and innovation. And with that being said, the Wisdom trial is an excellent opportunity for our organization and our patients to participate in this cutting-edge research in the realm of breast cancer screening. I'm sure everyone's familiar with the term precision medicine, and essentially what the Wisdom trial is precision screening for breast cancer using personal history, family history, genetics, and radionomics. Next slide. So one of the first questions you might be asking is, well, which of my patients can participate? And it's a very inclusive trial, so anyone, any woman ages 40 to 74, and this is the population that's having screening mammography done anyways, with really the only caveat being that they've never had a personal history of invasive breast cancer or ductal carcinoma in situ. Next slide. So again, it's very patient-centered and inclusive trial. So if your patient doesn't speak English or just prefers Spanish or is more comfortable in Spanish, all the enrollment materials, consent, everything is in Spanish so that Spanish-speaking patients can enroll as well. Everything is in plain English language in plain language so that it can be easily understood by anyone. And again, the goal is to really encourage women from a wide array of races, educational backgrounds, and socioeconomic status to join and participate in the trial. Next slide. So in this age where, in this digital age where everyone has a cell phone or there's Wi-Fi everywhere, it's very easy to enroll in the trial. You can do it on your mobile phone, on your tablet, on your computer. You simply go on to the study website, thewisdomstudy.org. Next slide. And essentially, this is what the website looks like. They would just click on Join Now. Next. Next slide. Brings them to this page. They would then go on to Get Started. And then, this is also in Spanish if they prefer Spanish. Next slide. And they fill out just a few questions and create their account. And from that point, our research coordinator has a work list that automatically populates, and we can help the patient from there if they get stuck at one of the points of enrollment or consent. Next slide. When they enroll for the trial, they're given the opportunity to select to be randomized, or they can actually choose to be in the personalized screening cohort or in the annual screening cohort. So If the patient feels very strongly that they do want their mammogram every year, that they would otherwise be anxious without it, they can definitely select to be in the annual, self-select to be in the annual screening group. Or if they would prefer to just know what their risk is based on their genetics and their family history and the radionomics, then they could also be given the opportunity to self-select and be in the personalized group. Next slide. From there, it's very simple. If they're in the annual cohort, they would receive a screening letter and have an annual mammography performed. If they're in the personalized cohort, it's just one extra step. They receive the color kit. It's a saliva test that's sent to their home. They return it. Then they await the results from the screening letter and the genetic test results, and then they're put into whichever personalized screening schedule they're assigned to based on their risk. Next slide. In the screening report, they're given guidance as when to start or stop screening and how often to be screened. They are given information of what type of screening modality is recommended for them and any risk reduction strategies if they're in the high-risk group. Next slide. I just wanted to provide a few examples of what those letters would look like if they enroll in the study and they bring it to your office. If they're in the annual cohort, it would look like this, and it would simply be saying that they're recommended to have an annual screening mammogram. Next slide. And the personalized cohort, this is an example of a letter that they would receive if they were in the highest risk group, where they would be recommended that they have a breast MRI and mammogram annually. Next slide. This high risk group would also likely have had a pathogenic mutation, and this is what the color genetic report would look like. Next slide. Alternatively, if they're found to be in one of the lower risk groups, this is what the letter would look like, suggesting or recommending screening mammogram every 2 years. Next slide. And this group would most likely have no mutation identified. Next slide. So as you can see, this is a nationwide multi-center trial, and we are in very good company with many high-powered academic institutions. So it's really an honor and a privilege for our organization to be participating in this trial and for us to offer this to our patients. Next slide. The goal is to enroll 100,000 women. Next slide. This map just shows that women from all over the country can enroll. They don't necessarily need to be at one of the recruitment centers, but just that the majority of women are at one of the recruitment centers. Next slide. Currently, we're at approximately 44,000 people registered and 32,000 consented. So we still have a lot of work to do. Next slide. So what we're asking of our organization and for you as a TopLine MD physician is to help us promote the wisdom study throughout your clinic and in your office. And some ways that you can do that is simply by putting flyers in the waiting room. You can opt in to have a informational video played in your waiting room. Or if you have a listserv that contains your patient's emails or a way to widely communicate with your patients, we can send out a message to your patients, making them aware of this opportunity. Another way is that you can simply reach out to our research coordinator, Isabella, and she can conduct outreach to your patients through the phone, through the email, or she could even come by the office for half a day and speak to some of your patients while they're waiting in the waiting room. Next slide. So you would know if your patient is enrolled in a trial if they bring you the screening letter and the genetic results. And another way is, if you prefer, we could have Isabella, their clinical research coordinator, provide you a list quarterly, for example, giving you a list of the patients that are of your patients that are participating in the trial. Next slide. And this is Isabella, our research coordinator. She's bilingual in English and Spanish. Her contact information is here, and she is well-versed in the trial and knows the ins and outs and can help guide you or your patient into enrolling in the trial. Next slide. Other ways is through social media. So if you know during Breast Cancer Awareness Month, you're posting stuff about your LLC, to go get your mammogram, make sure to @thewisdomstudy.org, and just anything like through this will help with getting the word out. Next slide. And I think now we can open up the conference to any questions.
All right, thank you, everyone. And if you do have questions, the best way to pose those are through the Q&A. It looks like there are a couple that have been posed so far. The first one I'll read from Brandon is, most breast cancers are not hereditary. If we screen patients with no genetic mutations every other year or start them at age 50, don't we miss more cancers, especially in the 40 to 49-year-old group? So Laura or Dr. Plaza, if you want to take that one.
So I think that the data that Brandon may be referring to doesn't take into account everything that's being done with this risk personalization. It doesn't take into account the genetic polymorphisms and that polygenic risk score. So we have a lot more information than the data that you may be referring to. So the answer is, this is a research study, and we're trying to find out yes or no whether it's equivalent to annual screening or not.
The evidence is there's a lot of evidence to suggest that if you look at where most breast cancers arise, the majority arise late. The kinds of cancers that are more common in young women are the faster growing cancers. I happen to run a study called the I-SPY study, which is women with stage 2 and 3 breast cancer. And one of the things that we've discovered in that study is that close to 80% of women have what we call interval cancer. So the people being screened, or most of the people who have those cancers, we're not finding those kinds of cancers with the current way we're screening. So it's not to say that we're not throwing screening out, we're just trying to make it better.
I believe we lost Laura.
Did we lose Laura?
I think so. Oh, now she's coming back. Laura, are you there? You cut out for just a second.
Can you I can start my video whenever you want. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Can you guys hear me? Okay. So
Okay. I think she has cut out again. So let's move along to the next question, and we can circle back once she has better reception. So let's see, one question from Susan: is the study paying for recommended testing? The answer to that is yes. The study and or funds that we have raised will be covering the costs of the testing as part of the study. We have partnered with some insurance companies to help pay for those costs, but in Florida, the majority of participants will be covered by our study funds. So there's no cost to the participant, no cost to the organization. Let's see. So another question that came through that I think we've answered, but I think is still relevant is if a participant has had genetic testing via color or myriad, would they have to retest? And the answer is yes. And there, again, there's no additional cost, but it's important that we make sure we have the same data for everyone in the personalized cohort. And the color test that we are using is different than one that's used in standard of care or one that's available on the direct to consumer market, because we are only testing for 9 breast cancer related genes as well as the panel of SNPs. So it is a saliva-based test. It just gets mailed to the participant's home and mailed back and then shared back to the participant. Let's see. So another question, how long are you following patients? So the study is a 5-year study. We are trying to follow patients for at least 5 years, but we do request that we follow their medical records for an additional 5 years, so a total of 10, but their active participation would be for 5 years. So that is so that we can allow for at least 1 screening cycle and 2 years of follow-up for everyone who enrolls in the study. Okay.
Something if we can find better ways of screening, we can continue to enroll. And one of the things I always say to people is I just spent 35 years screening better.
Okay. Let's see, another question that's been posed, are all patients screened via the genetic test prior to enrollment? So I can answer that question. The answer is no. So only the participants in the personalized arm get the genetic testing as part of the study. So we do ask if you've had prior genetic testing and or if your family members have had prior genetic testing. And that helps us to understand your family history and, you know, if you're potentially a true negative, if you test negative, but a family member has tested positive. It's all part of our risk assessment and analysis of someone's individual risk. All right, good questions coming in. Thank you, everyone. Another question, have you seen dropout after getting genomic information? We haven't looked specifically. We can look at that data and share it back. I don't believe so, particularly for people who, you know, either get a result that wasn't expected, either towards the negative or to a positive, because we are doing counseling for many of those women. It's informative for them to then take back and share with their local providers. And I think it also, you know, there's value in providing information back. So our goal is that we will continue to analyze people's information. So as our panel of SNPs expands and as our polygenic risk score improves, every year that someone is in the study, we will update their risk assessment and update their screening assignment. So it could be that if our polygenic risk score or polygenic risk algorithm has an update, it could actually change someone's screening assignment. And some of the changes to date have been to include some of the racial and ethnic specific SNPs. And that has caused some people to change their screening buckets either up or down. Okay, another question, Michael, this would be a good one for you. Will we be using our diagnostic centers here in South Florida, and will our offices receive links to place in our websites?
Can you repeat the question?
Will we be using our diagnostic centers here in South Florida, or will our offices receive links to place in our websites?
Yeah, the plan is yes, to use the diagnostic centers to encourage enrollment. Ideally, we would want the patient to have enrolled before coming in for their into the diagnostic center for the mammogram. So, that's why we're kind of reaching out to our referring doctors. When they come to you guys before their mammogram, it's a good opportunity to speak to them about enrolling in the trial. But with that being said, they can always, if they have them come in and they see the opportunity to enroll at the diagnostic center, they can still enroll, and then they would be put into whatever cohort the following year. So they shouldn't really be discouraged from enrolling at any point, even if they had their mammogram last week, for example.
So I would also say is anyone can enroll, and they can enroll on their phone, on their iPad, at home. So if you're sitting and waiting in the office, and someone is waiting to see the physician, that's a perfect time to enroll, and they can do it while they're sitting at the diagnostic center as well.
Okay. And then there's also a question about flyers for the exam room. So yes, we do have flyers. We have a video that can go on the electronic screens in the waiting rooms. There's a bunch of different ways in which you can place information about this study in exam rooms or in your waiting rooms. Isabella is the best point of contact for that. And there is an opt-in to including that information within your clinics. So please do let us know if you're interested. We would love to provide you with the necessary information to help your patients gain awareness about the study. Additionally, if you have the option to invite your patients via email or via an electronic health record system, that's another way. We have IRB approved messaging and emails that can be used as well. So even if your patients aren't coming into the clinics, particularly now during COVID, that's another way to try and reach patients who may be seen virtually or who visit your information sites. All right. Let's see. So another question, emailing about the contact information for Isabella. Yes, definitely. We will follow up to this webinar with an informational email that includes a link to this presentation, Isabella's contact information. We can include the flyer, as well as link you to the communications team to understand how you can get printed copies within your clinic and how to opt in to having the video shown on your clinic screens. Additionally, we'd be happy to answer any questions after this call, either through our central office at UCSF or having Isabella and the TopLine MD Alliance team answering questions. We are here for you and would be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Enrollment
and
is
as I said, I was just going to say, if people have specific things that they want to learn more about, if they want to have a seminar more about the genetics and sort of the changes in what we've learned, or if people are interested in some of the new findings about breast density, or if people are interested, in actually learning and having a webinar about breast cancer prevention and how the breast health decisions tool works, and we're happy to come back and give a seminar about that and answer any questions that you might have.
And I was just going to mention there was a question whether the enrollment is currently active. It is. Actually, anyone across the entire country can enroll. So not just within the TopLine MD Alliance in Florida, but anywhere across the country. So we have a big effort to try and increase our communications and building awareness nationwide. If you know people in other areas, feel free to share the information across your networks as well, social networks, whatever you think is most appropriate.
And I was going to say, one of the reasons why we're particularly excited to partner with TopLine MD and Vital MD is because all of you have relationships with your patients, and it's as we do it across the country, it's you know, people hear about it randomly, but when we think that there's going to be a big difference when the primary care physicians are involved, the radiologists are involved, and the patients are, you know, part of that, and everyone is on the same page. We would expect that your organization is going to do particularly well, and patients are going to be excited about being part of this. And I think one of the things to emphasize to women who participate is this is a real opportunity to make things better for themselves, for their children, for their parents, for their friends. And there is, you know, it's easy to join, but there's a real commitment. They need to keep in touch with us and let them know if they have a biopsy. You know, we ask a survey every year. Only if they stay in touch with us will this be successful. We're really, you know, we're counting on women being part of this important movement to improve our approach to breast cancer screening and prevention, because the only way to do better is to know better. And one of the ways to know better is to participate in the wisdom trial. So, and we're working on getting some tote bags that say we are wisdom, or I am wisdom, as for joining and sending in your first survey. So we're going to be working on getting those things for you, and maybe we can brand it with your with TopLine MD if you want it for your patients.
Laura, I have a couple of questions for you.
Sure.
First one is about your risk model. You use a different risk at the Diagnostic Center for Women, and our other diagnostic centers will use the Tyrer-Cuzick model. I know that's based on the British model, but you're using a very different model. It's the Breast Cancer Surveillance Consortium model. Can you explain the difference between the two?
We can. They're actually not that different. There's, you know, everyone uses the same basic factors. I mean, Tyrer-Cuzick and breast cancer surveillance all use breast density. They use the age at which someone starts their periods, and when they had children, and whether they or not they've had a biopsy, and whether or not they've had atypia. The family history is a little less weighted in the BCSC consortium model than the Tyrer-Cuzick, but we make up for that because we can actually get the genetics. We've incorporated that. So if you have a mutation, we know about it. The polygenic risk is now very good. And increasingly, the polygenic risk is important for telling us not just if you have risk for breast cancer, but what kind of breast cancer you have. So is it for hormone negative breast cancer, in which case we want to screen you earlier and more frequently? Or is it near positive breast cancer? Or is it aggressive cancer versus not? So the reason we use the BCSC model is because it was validated across 1 million women in the United States. And one of the group that we work with actually developed this, and this has been part of the National Mammography Registry. So we feel it's much more representative of the broad population of the United States, and that's why we use it. But it has all of the same elements. And again, the BCSC model or Tyrer-Cuzick alone, we want to do better than that. We want to incorporate the next set of information, which is the genetics themselves. So we've done that by integrating the polygenic risk and the genes, but as well, now we are working on getting these very specific radiomic features that looking not just at how dense the breast is, but which of the features really predict risk. That's another exciting area. So think about it as, you know, this is the version in 2021, the version in 2023 will hopefully be better, more robust, and more specific to the type of cancer that people will develop.
And I have one quick question about the SNPs. Now, we've had a lot of companies come in, talk to us about SNPs over at least 10 or 15 years. And I know that when you first started the study, there were just a few SNPs associated with breast cancer, and now there's 350. How much do these SNPs affect risk? And I've seen, you know, I have a lot of patients, or a number of patients have a strong family history of breast cancer, their gene testing, mutations are negative. And I assume they probably do have some SNPs.
So that's one of the things that this study like this will really help us learn, because we're collecting the information about family risk and we're collecting the SNPs. So we'll be able to see whether it actually tracks together. The SNPs for the majority of women actually downgrade their risk, but for some people it really increases their risk. And those are the people, though, in general, that we believe are at risk for hormone positive breast cancers. And those are we wouldn't recommend someone who is bumped up into the highest risk category because of polygenic risk. We wouldn't say, oh, you should have a prophylactic mastectomy, but we would say you are someone where endocrine risk reduction is a great alternative. And it's important to know now that there's increasing evidence that lower doses of tamoxifen, like 5 milligrams instead of 20 milligrams, is just as effective in this high risk setting. And we have evidence that it reduces breast density the same as 20 milligrams, and it's far better tolerated, and the risk profile is much better. So this is a really important advance, and this is something that I think people are going to be much more willing to take. And increasingly, it's not just going to be these 300 SNPs. So, the next move is really to do what we call a low pass whole genome testing, where a lot more information can be gained from looking at the whole genome. And again, we could probably do that for as low cost. That's one of the things, that's a pilot project that we have ongoing. And I wouldn't be surprised if in 6 to 8 months we switch to that so that we can keep up. It's really important as you try and think about how is the field changing, where is the information going to come, what technologies do you have to have, running in parallel to make sure that we can move as fast as the science move and not have clinical medicine lag 10 and 20 years behind the science.
All right.
And, one other question, can you comment on younger women with breast cancer below the age of 40? We're seeing these cases where these are really aggressive tumors. We're not even screening for this. And
That's right. And so while we're not directly addressing that in this trial, this is the kind of information that we're trying to work on, so that this particular, if someone has a gene mutation in their family, obviously we start screening them 10 years before the onset of the earliest case in their family. But we are hoping that the information from this trial will enable us to make the case that someone probably should be getting this kind of genetic test at age 30, not at age 40. And the people who are at that very high risk group should be not only in a group that gets increased surveillance, so maybe it's 2% of the population that's going to need that, but that we will have subtype specific prevention interventions to reduce the chance of getting and dying from these very aggressive breast cancers. And if we don't start down that path, we will never get there. And, we don't know how to do it right now. And so when we started the study, we had to stay within the guidelines. We are within, no one receives a recommendation that's outside of one of the major guidelines, either the American Cancer Society, the US Preventive Task Force guidelines, the breast imaging guidelines. Someone or another has a guideline that we're recommending. We certainly want to do more, but this is our first step. And so the more people that participate, the faster we can learn and the faster we can change and improve. So we really need your help. We hope you're as enthusiastic about this as we are. I've devoted my life to taking care of women with breast cancer, and I want to prevent it. I'd like to be able to do something different and apply all that we have learned to do a better job at the early end of this, at this disease.
another question, Laura. How many patients do you need in the study to make it significant, and how long does the study have to be? I know it's for 5 years, but to be statistically significant.
Yeah, so 5 years is plenty. We are hoping if we can even get 10,000 more patients in this next year, that will give us enough to be able to answer our first question, which is it as safe? And we can continue to ask more questions and say, is the next version of personalized screening even better? So, obviously we'd like to get to 100,000, that gives us all, more and more power. But if we even get an additional 10 to 15,000 women, we can answer our primary endpoint. So we know you could probably get, 5 to 10,000 patients in your center in the next year. So we think that would be fantastic.
Well, thank you everyone so much for attending. We will follow up with the contact information and any other information around how to put information about the Wisdom study in your offices or provide any digital information as well. And please do let us know if you have additional questions. As Laura mentioned, we'd be happy to have a follow-up discussion on any of the components of this study in more detail. So thank you so much, everyone. We hope you have a good night.
Right, and we're really excited to have Isabella join the team, and she'll be reaching out to all of you, and we hope you put this in your office, and we hope you enthusiastically endorse this study, and because that's really what patients want to hear or women want to hear. We really appreciate you, Michael, and your support and interest in this, and we're really excited to participate. And from both Dr. Essermans, we really appreciate it. And Jim, thanks for being such a champion.
Thank you.
Thank you.